You have to point to something where they're adding value to society.
Is that
So they have to achieve, they have to add value. But they don't have value.
Yeah.
The man literally just said that human beings don't have value. They have to add value to society. And I guarantee you there will be no shortage of atheists in this comment section still trying to defend what he said. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Cross Unit. I'm your host, Brother Maverick, and today Matt Delahunty really did once again get painted into a corner. And at least this time, he didn't get up and leave the conversation. He was talking to Glen Scrivener, a Christian apologist who really was actually painting him into a corner that he couldn't get out of. Even when he was backed up against a wall, he dug in and doubled down, and I could not believe what I was hearing. So as usual, guys, you're going to catch my thoughts a little in the middle and, of course, on the other side. Let's man up.
All human beings are worthy of provision and protection. All of them. Right? Would you agree with that? All members of the human family, no matter what their achievements, no matter what their attributes, all members of the human family are worthy of all provision and protection.
I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. That's a problem.
You say Hitler comes to me and says, you wouldn't believe how much better our society is off now that we're eliminating these people. Then you have to go back and look at it and say, okay, what have you lost? You have to point to something where they're adding value to society.
So they have to achieve, they have to add value. But they don't have value.
Yeah. The fact that we seem to have a desire for meaning, purpose, value, all of those things, he'll use as evidence for the God, because that serves as an explanation for it. I can do that with that exact same example. The reason that Glenn sees God as the justification for that is because he's uncomfortable with the possibility that there isn't an explanation for it, or that this isn't some sort of universal truth. So a preference for, I want there to be intrinsic human dignity, gets you to, hey, if there was a God, there would be human dignity because this God is guaranteeing it. And so that same circular preference is there. I'm just eliminating both of them and saying, I'm going to go ahead because I care about human beings and I value human beings because I am one, and say whether there's a God or not, this is what I'm going to go for. And if there's a God that has a better way, they can demonstrate it. Why isn't a Damascus Road experience good enough for everybody?
So a couple of disturbing things right off the bat with Mr. Delahunty. He first says that human beings don't inherently have value. And he only said that, I believe, because he knows that the conversation inevitably is going to go back to the fact that God created us in his image, and therefore that's the reason why we have value. But then he pivots and says, no, human beings don't inherently have value unless they're adding something of value to society, which to me is a subtle way of saying, yeah, basically human beings ain't worth anything unless they have something that they can demonstrate they can contribute to society with. That to me made absolutely no sense. Human beings are valuable because we're created in the image of God. But then he steps even further to the left and says, but again, I think that human beings have value because I'm a human being, and therefore because I say that they're important, then they are important, and it has nothing to do with God. So basically, no, it's not the creator of the universe that establishes value. It's you, Mr. Delahunty, because you're a human being, and therefore you say subjectively that we have value, and so therefore we do. If we have to choose between what God says and what Mr. Matt Delahunty says, no matter how intelligent he may be, I'm going to side with God 10 times out of 10.
So the moral argument for God's existence is not that we need some kind of arbitrary moral figure who has some whims and he will enforce them at the point of hell, and therefore it would be better if we want to live in a moral world to believe in such a God. The moral argument for God's existence is there is an objective realm of moral values. And the explanation for that objective realm of moral values is not going to be a material cause, because morals are not material things, right? Moral values are not reducible to just biological reality, and thank God for that, because biological reality is the survival of the fittest, okay? But moral values are something distinct from biological values, natural values. You cannot get from those natural values to the ethical values. You can't get from an is to an ought. And you sure can't get from preferences to an ought. You can't get from a like to an ought.
Of course you can. You can always get from preferences to an ought.
No, you can only get from preferences to another preference. It just becomes another preference just backed up with force.
The problem is, all right, we're not going to necessarily. So first of all, I don't think we disagree on the is-ought dilemma. But as soon as you get into preferences, that's the objection. The reason you can't get from an is-ought is that you have to inject a preference. It's injecting the preference that gets you to the ought. I would like to live in a world where this happens, therefore I ought to do that. Mm-hmm. The objection on the is-ought thing is this thing. If I start with the foundation of I would like to, is not a problem with what it leads to, but why should I lie
with
to?
the power, I suppose, is what I'm getting. Glenn is saying, if the person in power, say the Hitler, simply has a very different conception of what the best is for his life compared to your life, then do you have any moral, if you like, force to say you're doing something wrong? Isn't he just going with his preferences as opposed to your preferences?
Yes.
So what is it that's up here that says those preferences are better and those preferences are worse? What is that?
This is the objection that's often launched. So I could sit down with Hitler. I wouldn't, because he's dead. But I could sit down with Hitler, and if we could find the thing that we agree about, that we care about, we can then demonstrate which one of our preferences are in conflict with that. Because what we do as human beings is often delude ourselves, and we look at our preferences and assume they're right. But they're going to conflict with something foundational, which is basically at the beginning of that superiority to secular morality talk. I talked about how you could begin with, let's say, 3 foundational premises. Life is generally preferable to death. Health is generally preferable to sickness. And pleasure is generally preferable to pain. None of them are universally true. Sometimes pain is preferable. Sometimes death may be preferable, which is why I support death with dignity for people who no longer have any hope of a quality of life and with their individual autonomy and control over their own life. But you can begin with those and you can build something. But you can start with anything. You could start with death is better than life, and what you get to is extinction. Sure. And so if I find something, I think Hitler probably, there's the old joke, Hitler probably loved his mother too. Hitler probably valued human life, just had justifications for excluding certain others.
Right.
And you think you could reason Hitler into...
I don't know that I necessarily could.
Why
because there are
reason
people,
you into his way?
It might be. I'm not saying that that's not necessarily the case. I'm saying if you can show that what your actions are and the things that you're justifying are in conflict with a foundation that you agree with, that's where the problem is.
He stated that people like to delude themselves and that they feel like their preferences are correct just because they are their preferences. And that is true for a lot of people. What Delahunty doesn't understand about Christianity is that for the most part, the way that we feel and the things that we do are not what our natural preferences are. For example, we can talk about me and say that my preferences are to be on here doing this ministry and trying to pass the word of God on to you guys, right? But that's not my natural human preference. My natural human preference is to stay to myself, to not really talk to people because I don't like being nice to people. And I'm just telling you guys honestly, as a man of Christ, that my natural preferences are completely opposite to what Jesus Christ wants me to do. So the entirety of his following statement meant absolutely nothing to me because he made it clear that he has absolutely no idea what people's actual preferences are. Most people in Christianity don't want to deal with the conflict that comes with trying to evangelize to people, but we do it because Jesus Christ commanded us to. But understand that most of what the Bible says that we should be doing are not things that people want to do, especially those who are people who have a relationship with Christ. Those who go out and evangelize, go on missionary trips, put out videos on YouTube, whatever it is that you're doing for Christ, believe me, it is a lot easier to be a person of the world. It is a lot easier to swear at people, to be unkind to people, which is what most people, including myself, would rather do. I would rather just tell people they can go to nowhere, but I can't do that as a person of Christ. So no, your preferences don't dictate who you are, and your preferences definitely don't mean that you're right, because I know what my natural preferences are, and I know that they are not correct. So that entire statement that he made, I have no idea where he's coming from on that.
Right. And what if it's the establishment of the master race? Because if the fittest do survive, then wouldn't it be nice if the fittest should survive? Like, we take that hop, skip, and a jump, and
sure. And then you ask, what criteria are you using to determine fittest?
And again, we're having a symposium when we should be fighting a war, and this is.
No, we should always be having a symposium so we don't have to fight wars. Why would anybody ever say we should be fighting a war?
You sound like Neville Chamberlain. You know, I found peace in our time with Hitler because I'm going to sit down with him.
Well,
and
I'm sorry that advocating for reasoning rather than blowing crap up is so anathema.
I think we tried to reason with him.
I'm not saying, here's where the confusion is. I'm not saying after the war started, send Matt in and he can sit down with Hitler and solve it.
He's very clever.
We're using a precise example to talk about a more abstract one, which is essentially, let's say you and I disagree on, you want to take some action. You want to exterminate some portion of the population. The process that I'm advocating for is for us to figure out what shared foundation we have, if any, which we'll find something shared, and show which one of us is more in conflict with and which one of us is more in keeping with that foundation. Is it always going to be the case? No. But you asked how you would actually solve that, and I would. And if it didn't work, I'd kill him.
And if well-being, just very vaguely just defined, if well-being is the metric that we're using,
Yeah.
and if Hitler could say, "Oh, we are so much better off without the disabled," you have no idea. You know, we're soaring our industry, our numbers are through the roof, our well-being is doing incredibly well once we eliminate the sick, the weak, the handicapped. Is he right at that point?
Well, that's when you go through and you talk about what data are you looking at to define well-being, because
What data?
yeah.
You're having that conversation about the data because he's just told you I've eliminated
Oh my
the
gosh,
handicapped.
it's not like I'm no.
Okay, but
He's
because it is
saying-
happening right now. Okay, there is a Down syndrome population, for instance, that's being eliminated globally right now, and we're having a conversation about it. Okay, and I think it's better to have a conversation than to blow people up and all that sort of stuff. But it's a very live issue. I mean, it's not just the Godwin's rule.
I'm just going with the example that you say Hitler comes to me and says, you wouldn't believe how much better our society is off now that we're eliminating these people. Then you have to go back and look at it and say, okay, what have you lost? Is your society better? And are you just looking at the short term? Did you, in fact, how do you know that you didn't lose a cure for disease? How do you know that you're not worse off because it has fundamentally changed your psyche? How do you know that you're not worse off because you've lost art, because you've lost human connection? It's not just, see, this is one of the problems that you could point out to people that are going down there. Well-being is not just what's my
aren't those
financial
people's
well-being?
lives
What's this?
worth something, even if they didn't produce a cure for cancer or great works of art? Even if they just, sat around and consumed all the resources that all the able-bodied people were doing.
If somebody sat around and
I
did
get-
nothing but consume, I don't know how you could consider that as adding value. You have to point to something where they're adding value to society.
Is that
so
what
they have to
gives-
achieve, they have to add value.
So-
but they don't have value.
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying when I say that there's no intrinsic value to it, but
Right.
that I value human life, and that everybody, almost
Who's I?
everybody,
So who's I? You Matt
I'm
Delahunty.
speaking specifically for me, but also
If
I
someone
think
else
this.
doesn't, you try to
What-
reason them out of it. But
What? Yes. What do you? Okay. See, you sit there and you. Okay, let's try it. I don't value human life. Change my mind.
look at the Nazis. Look at that vision of humanity.
I don't care. I don't value human life. Change my mind.
You already don't.
You have yourself a humanity that has dignity. You might not believe it right now.
I don't. Change my mind.
I'm trying to change your mind by saying without achievements, without attributes, without contributing a penny of money, without expending a calorie of effort.
I worry, by the way,
You
that
are
this is going to
loved.
get cut as if this is really me saying this when it's not.
And I'm counseling you or something. Yeah, I'm your therapist.
And see, that's the thing of it at the end of the day is that is very, very typical for Mr. Delahunty, where he will sit there and use these arbitrary and petulant arguments as though anybody has the obligation to convince him of anything. Delahunty has made it clear long ago what his God is, what his idol is. And I'm not going to get into exactly what that is because we have spoken about it on this channel at length. It doesn't matter. We are all sinners. We all fall short of the glory of God. And I'm not going to sit here pointing out and say, oh, that's why he loves and that's why he hates God because God doesn't allow this. It's been said, it's been done. I'm not beating that dead horse anymore, okay? But Delahunty is very, very short-sighted when it comes to the fact that he doesn't want to acknowledge things as basic as human value just because he doesn't want to acknowledge God. So what does God say about human value? Well, Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them." That verse right there tells you everything that you need to know about human value. This was not just some theological debate. This is what it looks like when you rip objective morality out from under society and try to walk on quicksand. Matt Delahunty, an atheist, said point blank that he values human life, but only because he's human. Not because life itself has intrinsic worth, and not because God made man in his image, but because Matt basically just feels like it. And that's the issue. When morality is built on preferences instead of principles, you end up in some truly amazingly dark places. Now, the Christian apologist, Glen Scrivener, tried to show that without God, you have no solid ground to say that genocide is objectively wrong. And what did Matt say? I honestly couldn't believe he said this. He literally admitted that if Hitler came to him and said, hey, society's doing great since we eliminated these people, Matt would have to fall back on preferences. Not truth, not justice, just subjective reasoning. And I want you guys to let that sink in. Understand that this is what the atheist movement has become. And that's what Romans 1:22 meant when it said, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Because in Matt's world, Human dignity isn't a given, it's a feeling. It's a fluctuating social construct that can be discarded the moment that it's inconvenient to someone. And Glenn, to his credit, pressed him and he asked, so what gives you the right to say that your moral view is better than Hitler's? And what was Matt's response? Shouldn't surprise anybody at this point. He couldn't respond to it. All he could do was fall back on discussion and negotiation. But here's the thing, you can't reason with evil. You don't negotiate with genocide. You confront it with the truth. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the danger of a world that wants the fruits of Christianity like justice, dignity, and love without the root of Christ. Because once you cut off the root, the fruits, they rot. Everything, the branches, the leaves, everything, it's gone. And Glenn sees that. He knew and knows that without God, morality collapses into power games and personal preferences. That's why the conversation took such a horrifying turn. We are living in a time where the foundation of morality is under attack, day in and day out, where people like Matt Delahunty believe that they can build ethical systems out of thin air without any indicator and any anchor in God. But it always ends the same way, with confusion, contradiction, and moral chaos. Proverbs 14:12 says it clearly, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. And that's what we just saw. A man so confident in his own reasoning that he walked straight into darkness, and he's happy there. That's the saddest part about it. So what's the takeaway, guys? And it's very simple. Morality without God is a dead end. You either believe that all human life has value because we were created by a holy and just God, or you end up just like Matt, trying to argue with Hitler using nothing but vibes. Don't fall for it, guys, please, I'm telling you. It seems enticing, but it's not. Don't get swept up in the emotional fog of moral relativism. Stand firm on the rock of truth, because when the world gets darker, the light of Christ shines brighter. And if you're still wondering whether Jesus is the only way, look no further than this conversation. Glen Scrivener didn't just make a point. He exposed a worldview that crumbles without Christ. He backed Delahunty into a corner that he could not get out of. So I'm challenging you right now. Pick a side, truth or lies, light or darkness, Christ or chaos, because those are the only options. You live in a world that tells you love is love, that evil things are good, and the Bible makes it clear that when you dive into those depths, there is almost no coming back. And I implore and beg everyone out there, if you have even the most remote chance to start a relationship with Jesus Christ, please do it now before it is too late. Hey guys, I pray to God that you liked the video, and if you did, please type amen in the comment section if you agree, and if you don't, go ahead and leave those comments also. Just keep it respectful. As always, please don't forget to like the video, hit the sub button, share the video, and smash that bell for event notifications, guys, so you never miss a new video. If you love what you see and you want to become a channel sponsor, you can hit that join button where the sponsorship trailer will explain the different tier options and the perks that you'll get as a result of joining each individual plan. Also, don't forget to check out our merch store, as I recently added a ton of new merchandise to the store, and I would love to see nothing more than to see some of you guys wearing the Cross Unit logo out there in the wild. Lastly, the link to my Buy Me a Coffee is there as well. Of course, you're not required to do any of that. Just having you here with me is more than enough, and I am extremely grateful to God for your fellowship. As always, guys, be safe, be good, and be blessed. Remember that Jesus is King and the literal only way to heaven. So for those of you who haven't started a relationship with him yet, please consider it, because when he comes back for his people, it's gonna happen just like this.